The first time that I was ever arrested and sent to prison happened sometime around November of 2006. It was for a violation of probation, which I was sentenced to 1.5 years for and was released February 8th, 2008. But 1 month before my release, something would happen in that same city that I was sentenced from that would not only make national news, but also has to be referred to as a drug raid gone horribly wrong. What I'm about to tell you is the story of a guy named Ryan Frederick, and this is probably one of the craziest stories you will ever hear. Ryan Frederick was a Chesapeake native, 28 years old at the time, no prior criminal history whatsoever. But on January 17, 2008, Chesapeake police would attempt to raid his home after information was passed to them that Ryan Frederick had a marijuana grow operation running right out of his house. Now, to back up just a few days prior to this drug raid taking place, a police informant by the name of Stephen Wright would break into Ryan Frederick's home in what he would later claim was an attempt to gain probable cause to give to the police that Ryan Frederick was in fact growing marijuana right out of his home. But the crazy thing about this police informant, Stephen Wright, is that he knew Ryan Frederick. In fact, he dated the sister of Ryan Frederick's fiance, and he claimed that he had been over to Ryan Frederick's house multiple times in the past, seen the marijuana grow operation every time that he visited, and even smoked weed with Ryan Frederick on multiple occasions. But also a short time before this drug raid gone horribly wrong, Stephen Wright would be arrested for credit card fraud, and this possibly was the reason why he decided to break into Ryan Frederick's home in a possible attempt to gain probable cause for the police so that he could save himself from these credit card fraud charges that he faced. But when Stephen Wright broke into Ryan Frederick's home, he didn't just go in there trying to see what he could see for this possible marijuana grow operation. No, in fact, he allegedly stole like 5 plants from Ryan Frederick's home. And those plants that he allegedly stole were never recovered. So Stephen Wright breaks into Ryan Frederick's home, supposedly steals 5 plants from this marijuana grow operation, and then passes along information to the police saying, hey, look, I just broke into Ryan Frederick's home. He's got the marijuana grow operation going on right now. Go raid this house and possibly drop my credit card fraud charges. Okay, deal? But after this break-in, and if Ryan Frederick did have a marijuana grow operation inside of his home, the break-in was enough to make Ryan Frederick completely get rid of anything that was in the house, if ever there even was anything inside of the house. So when it came time for police to execute their no-knock warrant, as it's referred to, basically just coming up to the house, kicking the door in, or at least attempting to, Ryan Frederick was asleep in his house. Supposedly he had the music on, he couldn't hear exactly what was going on, and he was woken up to the sound of his front door being kicked in. Boom! 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 Ryan Frederick testified that he had no idea who was on the other side of that door. All he knew was that his home had just been broken into 3 days prior to this, and according to him, he thought it was possibly the same people coming back to try to break into his home again. So Ryan Frederick, possibly being in fear for his life, went to the front door with a gun in his hand and began shooting through the door. Bang, 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 bang! And while doing so, he shot and killed a detective who was on the other side of that door. Ryan Frederick was arrested, the drug raid proceeded, and they did not find any sort of a marijuana grow operation inside of his home at all. In fact, all they found was a small amount of marijuana, small enough to be considered personal use, and the only drug charge they were able to give him was a simple possession of marijuana charge. But also, because of this situation and the fact that he shot right through the front door of his home, striking and killing a police officer in the process, Ryan Frederick was also charged with first-degree murder of a police officer. A 28-year-old guy with a full-time job, no prior criminal history, and in essence, possibly only just defending his own home. No marijuana grow operation was ever discovered, and this drug raid only resulted in the seizure of a small amount of marijuana classified as a simple possession, but also a police officer killed in the process of all of this. Now, something else to throw into all of this, the police officers who were there to serve this no-knock warrant, they were undercover, plainclothes officers. So even if Ryan Frederick could see beyond the door, he wouldn't have seen any sort of police uniforms on the other side of it. His argument that he believed that these were the same individuals coming back to break into his home again could have gained even more ground because of that very fact that these were plainclothes undercover officers. Now again, all of this happened 1 month prior to me being released from prison for the very first time. And I can remember watching on the news as Ryan Frederick was led into the courtroom from the jail wearing his red jumpsuit. Red represented the fact that he was in solitary confinement, isolation. He had to be housed in isolation for a number of reasons. One, he had a high-profile case, meaning this was a case that was making national news. And in those circumstances, prisoners have to be kept in isolation. And two, it was for his own safety. It could have been prisoners inside of the prison who wanted to harm or even kill him, or even staff members inside of the jail themselves. But I can specifically remember watching on the news as Ryan Frederick would be escorted into the courtroom, and while doing so, the camera would show the inside of the courtroom and how it was completely packed with every single member of law enforcement, as it seemed, from the Chesapeake Police Department. I mean, just think about if you were in that position, being led into a courtroom facing a first-degree murder charge of a police officer, and the possibility that you didn't even know that it was a police officer on the other side of that door that you shot and killed. And as you were being escorted into that courtroom, you look around and it is nothing but what seems to be the entire city police department sitting in there looking at you like they want to kill you themselves. Just the raw emotion that went into this case itself and all of the underlying circumstances that surrounded it. Was Ryan Frederick going to be found guilty of killing a police officer, a first-degree murder charge, with all of these different variables that went into his case? And again, this happened 1 month prior to me being released from prison for the very first time. Well, back then, and me still being a complete fuck-up in life, it wasn't 10 months after I had been released that very first time from prison that I was locked up again, facing the charges that would ultimately send me to prison this last time for 7 years. So I was again locked up and still watching this Ryan Frederick case play out on the news. And by this point, his actual trial had begun. Now, what was so crazy about his trial? There was a list of jailhouse snitches who actually came to court to testify against Ryan Frederick. Now again, mind you, he had been in isolation, solitary confinement throughout his entire stay in the jail. This isolation that he was housed in only allowed him out of his cell 1 hour a day. And during that 1 hour, he would have the opportunity to either take a shower or go to rec. You can't do both while in isolation. So you have to pick. Are you going to take a shower today? Or are you going to go to the little dog kennel isolation rec yard for that day? But it was during these times that he would be in that dog kennel rec yard where supposedly these jailhouse snitches who were in court testifying against him had the opportunity to talk to him. And this is allegedly where they gained information pertaining to his case. Ryan Frederick had a top-paid criminal defense lawyer representing him. I'm quite sure this lawyer told him, do not talk about your case to anyone inside of this jail. But yet during his trial, here were these jailhouse snitches who were coming to court testifying against Ryan Frederick with alleged information that he had given to him pertaining to his case, in an obvious attempt for these jailhouse snitches to gain some sort of a time cut in their own cases. The first jailhouse snitch / informant to come to court to testify against Ryan Frederick was obviously Stephen Wright, the guy who had caught credit card fraud charges, who had known Ryan Frederick, and 3 days prior to this drug raid gone wrong, had broken into his home in an attempt to gain probable cause information to be passed along to the police. He was the first of these snitches to be called to the stand. Stephen Wright portrayed Ryan Frederick as a vengeful killer with gangsta vibes. And this is completely contrary to what neighbors, friends, and employers had said about Ryan Frederick up until this point. Stephen Wright was also never charged with the break-in at Ryan Frederick's home. And coincidentally, his credit card fraud charge was rescheduled until after the Ryan Frederick case was over. What also was revealed in court was that Stephen Frederick was already a police informant before he even caught the credit card fraud charges. In fact, it was found out that Stephen Wright had become a police informant after a drug dealer had threatened him, and he went to the police, who paid him $60 for information that ultimately led to the arrest of that drug dealer. $60. Stephen Wright also claimed in court that the police never asked him to break into Ryan Frederick's house. Instead, he did this on his own, planning to take 5 plants for himself and then leaving the other 5 plants for the police to find during the raid. But the problem for the prosecution was, if they were to believe Stephen Wright's testimony, they would also have to believe that he is a habitual liar who spins falsehoods whenever it suits his best interest. The next jailhouse snitch that they called to the stand was a guy by the name of Jamal Skeeter. Skeeter was already serving a 14-year prison sentence and had been brought back to the jail to testify against someone else in an unrelated case for a possible time cut, when allegedly and while in protective custody himself, he had the opportunity to speak with Ryan Frederick, who he basically said began to spill the beans about his entire case. Skeeter testified that Ryan Frederick allegedly told him that he was high when the police came to kick in his door, that he had hollow point bullets inside of his gun, and when the prosecution asked Jamal Skeeter about Ryan Frederick's demeanor, Skeeter testified that Ryan Frederick was just trying to be a gangster and that he didn't seem sorry for what he did. Jamal Skeeter also testified that he had made no deal with anyone and that he was testifying against Ryan Frederick solely for the family of the fallen detective. The next jailhouse snitch to take the stand against Ryan Frederick was a guy by the name of Lamont Malone. And Lamont Malone was already serving time for 7 felony convictions, had already testified against someone else in another unrelated case, and had his sentence reduced from a life sentence that he was serving to 19 years. To go from life to 19 years, you definitely did some snitching. But Lamont Malone testified in court that Ryan Frederick went by the nickname Calvin while locked up, and that he also called his gun Roscoe. What? He also testified that when the police kicked in the door, Ryan Frederick panicked. Bang, 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 bang! And he just began shooting as he made some sort of an attempt to get rid of the product that the police were coming after. He also testified that he didn't know how he went about getting rid of that product. When the trial had wrapped up and all of the jailhouse snitches had spoken their piece, it was time for sentencing. On February 4th, 2009, Ryan Frederick was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The first-degree murder charge of a police officer was dropped to voluntary manslaughter. And for the small amount of marijuana that was found during this no-knock drug raid, he was sentenced to 30 days, given a simple possession charge, first-time offender status for drugs. This was a very crazy case. A police officer lost his life while serving a drug warrant after information was gained from a police informant who broke into the home of the person that he was snitching on to steal marijuana plants that he also told the police this guy was growing inside of his home. And again, those plants were never found. I'm not exactly sure what happened to Stephen Wright and his credit card fraud charges, or to the other snitches who came to court to testify against Ryan Frederick. But I can guarantee you that they did not receive any sort of a time cut for their testimony. In fact, all they probably succeeded in doing was putting it out there for the entire world to see that they were jailhouse snitches, still serving time themselves. And you can rest assured that this probably didn't help make the time they were already serving any easier. Hey, look, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did so, please leave a like and a comment. Let me know exactly what you think about this entire story. And until next time, enjoy life, the free world. Never take a moment for granted, and make the most of every day. Peace!